Image description. Title clip. Project Reach presents Managing Stress and Building Resilience During an Ongoing Pandemic. Jacina Williams, MSW, LCSW. On the left, a woman with long red hair, glasses, and wearing a green sweater is in a room with Chicago Bears football decor. On the right, a woman with long white hair, glasses, and wearing a gray sweater is in front of a navy blue curtain.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for Managing Stress and Building Resilience During an Ongoing Pandemic. Jacina Williams, MSW LCSW, is with us today. And before we get started, I'm just going to put something into the chat box. If you are using the captions today, they will be in Zoom, and then you also have the option of following them in stream text. You should see that in the chat box. If you want to follow the captions in Zoom, if you look at the bar underneath your presentation, you'll see three dots that say more. And if you click on those, you should be able to see something that says view full transcript. If you click on that, you'll be able to see the transcripts. So I'd like to introduce Jacina. As I mentioned, she is a social worker, and she's also the statewide coordinator for the deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, and late deafened for the Illinois Department of Human Services, Division of Mental Health. And in this role, she provides access to and coordination of mental health services for people with hearing loss, including those with deafblindness. The statewide coordinator, Jacina, is also available to educate communities and service providers about mental health resources and services, provide consultation and training to funded providers on how to provide mental health services to people with hearing loss, and collaborate with both internal and external stakeholders. Jacina graduated from McMurray College with a bachelor's in social work and a minor in deaf education and liberal arts. She also has an extensive background of working with people who have hearing loss and deafblindness, both personally and professionally. She grew up with two cousins who are deafblind, and this led to learning about deaf culture and American Sign Language and deafblindness from a very young age. I'm going to let Jacina share a little bit more about herself, but also just let you take over, Jacina. We're so happy that you're able to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you for joining tonight. And as Michelle said, this will be recorded for others to be able to access at a later time. And so thank you, whether you are joining live or at a later date. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Michelle, you can go to the very next slide because I have lots of information, not with the intention of overwhelming, but with the intention of it being available to you all in little bits, in short snippets, if that works well for you. So we will go through the material as readily as we can tonight to give examples, to have some interaction if possible, if folks are feeling okay to do that. And certainly there will be opportunities for you to click on resources, look up information in the future, and refer to it if it refer to it in the future as we go through this pandemic. So as Michelle stated, my name is Jacina Williams, and she gave a little bit about my bio. I am a social worker by trade, and I have been doing my current position as the statewide coordinator since 2014. And so as you probably also heard, I do have a background in deaf education. Excuse me, that's what I started my collegiate career and then switched over to social work. I'm also a parent. So yeah, so that lends to a little bit about my background. So as far as today, I wanted to get a little bit more information from our attendees who are joining live. If you're so inclined, again, that's voluntary. Of course, if you want to put in the chat box what grade levels are your children or what grade level is your child, and get a little bit more information about communication modes. So if you and that just helps me to tailor the information, because certainly within deaf blindness, there's a diversity. It's a continuum. In terms of working with children in general, there's always a continuum of abilities, needs, what grade level, etc. So Michelle, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I am seeing the chat box. Okay, Patty, thank you for sharing. So you're out in Pennsylvania. Gotcha. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we had talked in the presentation previously about, you know, with children, students, if you will, you know, of all age levels, and that's what I currently work within and have background and experience working within that. This is a quick grounding exercise, and we'll go through it quickly just because of time, but this can be a tool, if it's helpful to you, to use with yourself, with your children. There's been lots of more information in the mainstream about being mindful in the moment, checking our minds back into the present moment and grounding ourselves. And that just helps because our minds are continuously popping from one subject to the next. So we'll go ahead and just do a little bit of this grounding exercise to give you a sense, if you're not familiar with what this is about. So go ahead, wherever you are, get comfortable with where you're seated. And I'm going to model the same thing and do it with you. And if you don't feel comfortable doing this at any time, that is fine, because all of this information is voluntary and there is no test or quiz. So get comfortable with where you're at. A lot of times people put their hands on their laps, palm down or palm up, whatever you're comfortable with, putting feet on the floor firmly. A lot of times that means, you know, better posture. And what helps also is to close your eyes if that's something that you're comfortable with, and also doing some deep breathing. So getting yourself grounded would be to really clear your mind of anything that's not within the present moment. So taking a couple of deep breaths in, holding at the top, and then exhaling. One other technique that you can try that will have an more natural and bigger impact on your system for calming and also clearing your mind would be to double your exhale versus your inhale. So if your inhale is 2 or 3 seconds, and it can be whatever is comfortable for you, then double your exhale to 4 or 6 seconds. The pause at the top is to help your body also naturally relax. Now, if you're not comfortable, any of those things can be taken out. You can have shorter inhales, shorter exhales, no pause. So really tailor it to what you're comfortable with. So we'll just take 2 more deep breaths in. Pause at the top, exhale. And 1 more inhale. Pause at the top, exhale. Okay, and sometimes it's just good to kind of shake things out too. Next slide, Michelle. So now that we've gotten focused with this year and what we've been going through for the last 10 months, what is unique about the stressors that a parent may be experiencing? Tried to identify some visuals here for you in terms of how these stressors are unique. So if you for our live participants, if you feel inclined, go ahead and put some examples in the chat box of what are some of the unique stressors, or what are some stressors that you have found to be that you have found to experience since March. We'll say that March was the benchmark for the pandemic starting, just so that we have a baseline timeline here. And I think that, you know, parents are juggling so much that there's a lot of unique stress that parents have been feeling, whether their children are at home with virtual learning, whether they're homeschooling their kids, whether their kids are going to school, PPE and social distancing, and all these new terms that we've all come to learn about. It's very unique. So being able to identify and to put language to these unique stressors is important. Next slide. So with stress, we can feel certain things, we can see different things, we could have different thoughts, behaviors, mood, etc. With our time from March until now, we're going to say this is the 10 months of the pandemic. There are some signs of unique stress. And so what I have illustrated on this slide is to get you thinking about, has your stress been more intense? Have you noticed your energy level being different than what would be typical in a March through December year for you? Can you feel or see the effects of this stress on your body? Let's say tension. I know that a common physical sign of stress could be holding a lot of tension in your shoulders. I, for one, am that person, and that's where I hold my stress. Some people will have a loss of appetite, or maybe their hair is thinning or falling out. Those can be signs of stress. So this just gets you thinking about, are there any different signs that you have noticed? And there may not be. That doesn't mean that you're not under stress. Just to kind of compare this pandemic, because no one has gone through it within our lifetime before. So that is a huge difference in maybe how we are manifesting and dealing with stress. COVID fatigue is this last dot point on this slide. This new buzzword that I've been hearing about. You know, everyone, I would say we could probably agree, is tired. But this buzzword talks about not only feeling tired, but, you know, maybe even feeling like I'm tired of hearing about the pandemic. I'm tired of worrying about PPE or whether I can go out, and just the onslaught of information. Not that a person isn't taking it serious, it's the fact that our systems are reacting and feeling worn out and weary. So I just put that up there to kind of contribute to thinking about the signs of this unique time that we're in, and the unique stress that we're feeling. Next slide.
Jacina, you have a couple comments in here.
Oh,
Patty's saying that hours in the day fly by and I don't feel like I can catch up, and Faith is agreeing. I feel the same.
Yes, that time for sure. And we were speaking before we started with the days getting, you know, shorter, and feeling like the pandemic has lent to more roles and responsibilities and juggling and not having that time. So yeah, certainly that would be a good example of reflecting on that. Next slide. So with that being said, we've talked about kind of setting the stage and the environment in which we have been living within. And I really want to impress upon you, because I feel as though some people don't know. If you do know some of this information, it's easy to minimize this. So feeling anxious, nervous, worn out, stressed, negative, that's very biological. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's think about the fight or flight instincts that our ancestors have passed down to us. They use those for, you know, hunting, maybe a saber-toothed tiger or a mammoth, maybe a mouse on days that they couldn't find big game. They were out gathering food, shelter for their families. That has been passed down to us. Our fight or flight is within us, but we don't use it for that exact same purpose. What we could use it for and what we do use for it now is, as a parent, and I use this every day, I think about what my children will be doing, what the expectation of their day is going to be, and also what my schedule and expectation is going to be. When we plan for the what ifs, and when we have a plan A, B, C, D, all the way to Z, that's an example of our fight or flight. When we feel anxious and think about the what ifs, and we're always prepared, that is an example of our fight or flight. When we think about what's the worst that can happen in a situation, when I start to go down that rabbit hole and I could just continually focus on the negative, it's actually an example of fight or flight. Now, some of these examples, we can see some benefit in this, but certainly when it is overwhelming, when we can't shift our mindset out of this, it can really lend to what we're talking about with those signs of the stress. So Faith, I'm seeing you were saying, I feel the same. Why does stress make us want to eat more? There you go. So with the behavior changes that can be rooted sometimes in anxiety, it can be rooted in preparing for the what ifs. That certainly was an example of the hoarding behavior that we saw with the toilet paper. Michelle, you can go to the next slide as I talk through this. So some of those could be connected back to the fight or flight. And so certainly when we think about it in terms of a biological response, and that our brains have a natural inclination to the negative, you know, you kind of feel a little validated. Now, when we get to the point where, and I have felt this way many times in the last 10 months, I don't want my day to feel negative. I don't want my attitude to feel negative. I don't want to dwell on the negative. So how do we shift our brain out of it? I put in here this slide, 10% of the situation and 90% of the reaction. That can help you sometimes, because really we will always have stress, but how we react is kind of like the dominoes starting to fall and hit the other ones, with how our bodies will react to the stress as well. So Michelle's going to play this clip on gratitude, and this is one tool that you can use even in a time period such as this, which there's been a lot of tragedy, there's been grief of all different kinds, but it can help you shift out of your perspective of negativity.
Hi, Kate here. Welcome to Wellcast. If you've been here before, welcome back. If it's your first time, check out our introductory video. Long story short, it's 100 wellness exercises in 100 days. You in? Let's talk about two little words that will make you happier. Happy birthday? I do? Nope. Today, we're going to talk about saying thank you. Did you know expressing gratitude is scientifically proven to make you happier? Here's the deal. Humans operate on what's called a hedonic treadmill. It means we generally stabilize at one level of happiness. Going to a party or going to the beach might perk you up for a minute, but generally your level of happiness stays constant, whether you spend a day at the park or at the doctor. Basically, we take the things that make us happy for granted, so they stop psyching us up. By practicing gratitude and constantly examining what you're thankful for and why, you stop ignoring what makes you happy. Essentially, being actively grateful will make you a happier person. But don't take my word for it. Dr. Robert Emmons, a psych professor at UC Davis and author of Thanks, The New Science of Gratitude Can Make You Happier, has been doing experiments on gratitude for more than a decade. For example, Dr. Emmons gave 300 people journals and divided these people into 3 groups. One group had to write daily lists of things that they were grateful for. Another group had to write daily lists of things that annoyed them. And the last group, well, they could write about whatever popped in and out of their minds. Batman, strawberries, whatever. Emmons found that people who wrote about things that they were grateful for had a much higher level of well-being than the other 2 groups. Not only that, they slept better and exercised more. Group A's simple act of writing down what they were thankful for seemed to kickstart their brains. So, it's time to kickstart your brain with today's wellness exercise. Take out your Wellcast journal. Crack it open to a clean page and write "Things I am grateful for" at the top. If you're the kind of person that likes to be micromanaged, draw 3 columns and label people, places, and things. Take 5 minutes each night this week and add things to those columns. At the end of the week, take a look at the list. It's pretty long, huh? It's time for phase 2. Time to express a little gratitude out loud to others. Look, we're not saying you have to be one of those people who thanks trees for oxygen. I mean, you can, but just go down your list. Pick one of the things you wrote down and think about who gave it to you. Actually expressing gratitude will help you get off that hedonic treadmill and make you feel better about all the little things. Draft a letter to this person. It's okay. You can explain to them that a YouTube video is telling you to do this. But then get serious. Tell the person what you're so grateful for and why, and then thank them sincerely for it. If you're feeling adventurous, ask them out to dinner, and then you can thank them in person. After you send the letter or return from dinner, take out that Wellcast journal one last time. Open it up to a clean page and write down how you feel now in detail. Are you like...
Thank you, Michelle. So yes, we just wanted to watch that little snippet of this clip. So this clip showed you some tools around gratitude and why gratitude helps to shift our brains out of what they call the hedonic mindset. And then also I want you to remember that if your mind goes back to focusing on negativity, then know that that is completely natural. That's a human response. And there are ways with gratitude and some other ways that we're going to talk about here where you can, by doing this, you're managing your stress. So Michelle, go ahead to the next slide. And so with shifting our perspective, it made me think about these drawings or pictures that you may have seen in school or maybe even college or just, you know, growing up at some point or in the past. And I don't know what they're called actually. I call them perspective pictures. But just thinking about how when you see this picture and you may see the black vase with the white background for the first picture on the left, or you may see the 2 profiles that are white looking at each other with the black background. Think about how your perspective shifts each time you see those images, or maybe you only see one and it takes you a little while to see the second one. So I use that as an example on how to shift our perspective from that negative thinking to how gratitude can get us back into a more positive mindset. We're not going to view this clip on positive and negative thinking because of time, but I would certainly encourage you to watch it because it gives you more examples like these pictures on shifting your perspective. Next slide. So thinking about managing stress, I'm sure that you have thought about and you have actively done things to manage stress. What I want you to focus on is anything that you've done in the past, even if you feel like it's not really working right now, or things that you've always wanted to do. Maybe it's a skill that you've always wanted to learn, maybe a language, a craft, needlepoint, something like that. All of these things, I want you to give some consideration to, because it will really help a person during this time to have a variety of options, because when we get into that fight or flight response, we will forget things like such as, oh, really, when I started my day doing X, Y, and Z, I had a calmer mindset throughout the day, or I felt like by the time my children got up, I was ready to help them with their morning routine, as opposed to jumping out of bed and trying to help them and just being very short fused with them. So I say make a list, because in that panic or crisis mode, our brains do forget a lot of things. So put down, what are your tried and true stress relievers? What activities did you like to do as a child that maybe you just haven't done in years and years and years? But that will give you a recharging of some sort. Maybe even try some of the activities that we mentioned during this webinar. So what are some things, if you're feeling like you want to contribute, what are some things that you have tried in the past that have done, that have helped you manage stress? And I'm seeing one example, humming mindlessly. And I'm so happy that, Faith, you mentioned that, because humming actually biologically helps us to shift our perspective. So humming, with those tones that are produced with humming, it helps us to shift from that negative to more positive mindset. So biologically, that is going to help us, just like we were doing with our grounding exercise. Next slide, Michelle. The grounding exercise also can be known as box breathing, because we're inhaling those 2 seconds and then exhaling the double, or 4 seconds. So it's almost like a box. And I'll give you the resource link on that if you would like more information about it. So those are some biological stress relievers that will naturally have a relaxing effect on our bodies. This next clip that we are going to watch is on empathy, and it will give you another take on what empathy is as opposed to sympathy.
Captioner, I'm going to put the closed captions on the YouTube video. I apologize for not doing that before.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb. but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So as you can see, that was from Brene Brown, and I feel like that's a really great illustration of the difference between sympathy and empathy, with that huge focus on connection. During this time, we as humans have been struggling, and I say that as a generalization, and a lot of it is because of the lack of connection. Michelle, you can go to the next slide. We as humans are social creatures. We thrive on connection. And with self-isolating, quarantining, stay-at-home order, all those things, we are feeling less connection. With this slide, I wanted to take some time to talk about validation and holding space. You noticed in the clip that we just watched, the fox really needed some validation and someone to hold space. And what I mean by that is the character, I believe it was the bear, who climbed down into the hole, said, I've been there before, you're not alone. And actually was physically with the fox and was listening and had a supportive stance, like holding the hands like you see in this image on the slide. The other character, who was eating a sandwich and had the at least statements, really was not showing that connection or being vulnerable, and it didn't feel validating. When you ask or have someone that you can hold space with, you have a genuine connection, and maybe that just means that you need to talk, and you need someone to be there in your space, not saying anything. Maybe they do say some things, but it's very validating and you feel that connection. Next slide. So you may want to consider, who do you get genuine and positive validation from? Who could you go to if you felt as though having someone hold space for you would be helpful with managing stress? And as you're doing your management of stress that we all do every single day, but especially in these times, we're also building resilience. It may not feel like it, but when I say resilience, what I mean is our ability to stay the course. And when we stay the course, we're building a muscle of resilience, if you will. So if you think about, you want to be stronger physically and you want to build a muscle. With regular practice, you're building that muscle. With regular practice of using stress relievers, you're building a practice of resilience, and you're building the ability to get through this time, because we have that natural inclination of fear, anxiety, negativity that comes from our fight or flight. So when we regularly practice stress relievers, we break that natural inclination of our fight or flight. We also build those new pathways in our brain. So physiologically, we're having these changes, but that's not to say that you may not have thoughts that are negative, or the what ifs, or I have to prepare for that. And I'm not saying, and those things are not bad per se. You know, preparing for the day, preparing for the what ifs so that you have an emergency kit, or you have the appropriate PPE for the environment that you're going into, or you're planning for your child or children to go into in-person learning or virtual learning for the next semester. All of that is positive. That's what we do naturally as parents, right? So when going back to the resilience part of it, when we are practicing our stress relievers, we're going to naturally feel more calm and less anxious. So thinking about that in terms of resilience, and remind yourself, I have a natural inclination to think about what ifs. I have a natural inclination to feel anxious during this time. Next slide, please, Michelle. We've never been through a pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainty. Regular practice with our stress relievers can be supported by reminders. I live on reminders every day. When I have reminders, then my day flows better. I'm, of course, human. Here are some tips and some techniques that you could try. Put a reminder on your phone. Maybe daily affirmations helps you to start your day, but also having the reminder of these affirmations throughout the day. You could have a post-it on your bathroom mirror. You could have a post-it on your dashboard of your car, or maybe the door of your refrigerator. These post-its could be set my intentions for the day. Maybe you have a daily goal. Maybe it's a weekly goal. And it could be a reminder to do deep breathing. A lot of people have reminders on their phones to be more mindful and in the moment, and that might just be to take a break for 5 deep breaths to kind of recenter and reground themselves. So those are some other examples of building your resiliency. Next slide. And then also think about your past triumphs during crisis or past victories during whatever time. What that does is it reminds you and it shifts you out of that negative mindset of the fight or flight to say, hey, I've overcome before in the past. I've accomplished. I've achieved. Thinking about this also bolsters our resilience. A lot of people are feeling losses, either family members or friends, because of this virus. People like me who haven't lost anyone, I could be feeling the loss of being able to do the things that I enjoyed. My children also feeling those changes and being very sad about it. The reason I bring this up is because that is very unique to this situation. And we can really dwell on those things that we're not able to do and that we miss them a lot. Even going out to a restaurant as a family on, let's say, I went out every Friday with my family and feeling that loss from the restrictions, even though, not to say that, I have an opinion about the restrictions. It's just the factual statement of we're not able to do this for right now, and I don't know when we'll be able to do it because of these restrictions. Even making a list to say, these are the things I enjoy doing, but I'm not able to do them right now. But I can't wait until I can do them again. That also builds resilience. So when you think about your stress relievers, you can also think about those things that you're not able to do right now, but you know that at one point in the future when things stabilize more, that you'll have the opportunity. So you have some anticipation there, but it's not as though you can't do other things that you enjoy and relieve stress because you go back to your other list of things that you can do now. Always writing them down and posting them to remind yourself, even the triumphs, the victories, the things that you were able to do as a family, for example, that helps us remind our brains because our brains want to go to that fight or flight. Next slide. So now at this point, I want to talk about some resources, and I've given you all lots and lots of resources in this portion of the presentation. Again, not with an expectation that you have to go through all of these at one time. These are things that you might find helpful. Maybe some of the things just aren't really your style. Like for this first one, it's an actual written plan of how to relieve stress maintain your stress level, and how to approach crises. Who to turn to when you need someone to validate and hold space, who's your support system. And it can be as formal or informal as you want it. This plan, they call it a WRAP plan. WRAP is the acronym. It can be used for anything. And it's not necessarily that this was designed for a person that definitely was diagnosed with a mental health condition. This plan, and this is how I've described it to anyone who I've told about a WRAP plan, this plan is basically how do you manage stress and how do you deal with life? Because we all have stress and it's not going to go away. We have a lot of stress right now, and our brains may feel like they're in overload or crisis mode. And this plan actually breaks down different sections and helps remind us, oh, these are the things that I can turn to when I think that I'm so restricted, or I have to be self-quarantined because I was exposed to the virus, or whatever may be the instance. Having something written can be very powerful. The other thing with that I want to mention is, because of our digital age, they've also have a free app that you can put on your phone. So if you're not a pen and paper person like myself, and you want something that's more high tech, you can actually put it into an app where you're the only one that accesses it. But a lot of times people have their phones with them all the time, and so it's right there and it's accessible to them. Some of these other links, and Michelle, you can go to the next slide. There are other resources out there that are free. Again, I told you I would give you the box breathing. There was one about mindfulness on the previous slide. Michelle, you can go to the next slide. These are to give you some overview information about other tools and techniques that may work for you. And maybe you're just curious about, well, what's this thing that is on here about two wolves and mindfulness? Let me click on this and see what it is. This slide talks about who are the professionals and the agencies out there where I could go and access, and yes, these 3 agencies are in the Chicagoland area, but because of our pandemic, I can tell you all 3 of them are doing telehealth. So let's say that you are to the point where you would like to seek some professional help. And again, I would encourage anyone to seek professional help if they felt as though they would benefit from it. If they were ambivalent about it, I would say, you know, during this time of a pandemic, especially during this time of a pandemic, if you are feeling as though you are in that crisis mode more than not, these agencies, and you see it saying specialized deaf mental health services, they have professionals who work with individuals and families where one of the family members are deaf, including deaf blindness. So if you were wanting to seek professional help, these agencies, you wouldn't have to give a background information if the deaf blindness was in the context of what you would be processing during the individual or group therapy. Now again, mental health conditions and mental health struggles, they were already common before our pandemic. The latest statistics that we have been aware of were between 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people at some point during their lifetime may experience difficulties with their mental health and or a mental health condition. Imagine the prevalence now with the pandemic being ongoing. And so I say that because seeking professional help is not a sign of weakness. Yes, we still have, unfortunately, in our society, the stigma of mental health. However, I can tell you that mental health conditions are treatable. And we have these professionals at these specialized agencies who they see you. They get you with the deafness and the deaf blindness. So you have options. And then, like I said, they have telehealth available now because of the pandemic. Next slide, Michelle. Now, if these three providers, for whatever reason, if you need some other choices and options, here is the link where you can go to find out where the other providers are. So these providers may or may not be familiar with hearing loss, deaf blindness, if that is something that you feel as though would come up with working with them. But certainly there are over 200 other providers in our state. Next slide. Here is another resource that is completely free. They actually have expanded their hours during the pandemic. They're 8 to 8 Monday through Friday now. This is a warm line, not a crisis line. It is staffed by people who are in recovery, so they live out their wellness. So you could call for any type of validation, questions, concerns, and they give that free support to anyone in Illinois. And it's a fabulous resource that we have in our state. So, feel free to share these resources with anyone, especially this one. Next slide. Okay, let's look at our time. I'm going to pause for a second and ask if we have any questions at this point. And as I am watching our chat box, I will just say that you have a lot of resources that we have discussed, but then after this slide, we have a lot more articles, information, because there's been so much more mental health and wellness information in the mainstream media, social media, that I have collected quite a bit. And again, this is for your information if it's useful. And so knowing that as this pandemic goes on, month after month, and as we go into different phases of being within this pandemic, that there continues to be free resources out there. The websites that you have seen on these links and also in the slides after this one, they provide some useful information and tips. One of the clips from Wellcast, WELCAST, they were talking about all of their wellness activities with journaling and gratitude exercises. So there are a lot of resources out there. And so I just want to take the time to say that I really wanted you all to have a diverse array of those resources. So I don't see any questions in this chat, as I gave a little bit of time for that. So we'll go ahead, and Michelle, if you would like, I want to end with Mr. Rogers, because it is so easy, again, for our minds to stay focused on the negative, and here are some parting words from him on what he focuses on when it seems like things are out of our control.
So, in fact, news programs are probably the most frightening programs for anybody. My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any really catastrophe that was in the movies or on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, even just on the sidelines. That's why I think that if news programs could make a conscious effort of showing rescue teams, of showing medical people, anybody who is coming into a place where there's a tragedy, to to be sure that they include that. Because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
All of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are? Those who have cared about you and wanted what was best for you in life. 10 seconds of silence. Whomever you've been thinking about, how pleased they must be to know the difference you feel they've made.
There was all of this stuff on television about people getting killed and, you know, people in the direst of straits with visages that were tortured. And I understand that. I mean, I understand why that would need to be shown. We need to say it.
Always look for the people who are helping, she'd tell us. You'll always find somebody who's trying to help. So even today, when I read the newspaper and see the news on television, I look for the people who are trying to help.
So I felt like that was fitting as far as our conclusion here, to always look for the helpers. Like Mr. Rogers says, that instills in us hope and to focus on the good. And my other closing thoughts would be, we see you, we hear you with how the stress is different and ongoing, and it can be tough to, you know, scroll through our phones mindlessly and get focused on the media and news about COVID. And that is very natural for us to do. And it's hard because we don't know when the pandemic will be over. And what I would close with is yes, and not yes, but yes, and there are ways that you can manage this stress. Mr. Rogers said to think of, or encouraged us to think about people who have helped us in the past. And so I encourage you to think about, are those people available, or others who have those similar characteristics? Because that would be an easy way to identify who could hold space for you, who could validate and cheerlead you along the way. Because yes, this can be and has been a different time for us. It can be difficult at times, and it can be stressful. And each day, minute by minute, second by second, we're getting through those days. And so I hope that you've gotten some tips, maybe some new ideas to how you can manage your stress and build your resilience. And again, if you have any questions about seeking mental health services, or any questions about anything in the webinar, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on this PowerPoint. And so thank you for joining me, whether you were live or in person or at a later date, excuse me. And Michelle has a little information about evaluation and certificate of completion.